Welcome to the Money Answer Show with host Jordan Goodman. Whether you are starting out, deep into your retirement, or somewhere in between, the Money Answer Show has the know-how to help you. Now here's your host, Jordan Goodman.
Welcome to the Money Answer Show. This is Jordan Goodman, your host. My guest this hour is Robert Schulz. He's the founder and president of Schulz Wealth. He's been named to the top 100 financial advisors in the country as a certified financial planner. He's come out with a new book called Thoughts on Things Financial, Your Guide to a Chaotic Money World. Welcome to the Money Answer Show, Rob.
Thanks, Jordan. It's good to be here.
Just give us your history a little bit and how you got to writing this book.
Sure, you bet. I've been doing financial planning for a long time now, about a quarter of a century. So over time, people come into my office, we talk about things, and as you keep doing it, the same questions keep coming up. I keep saying the same thing. So I thought that I would put together a book and just kind of talk about some of the things that usually come up during the financial planning process while investing with generally, families, and just put it in a way that people can read it and understand it. Doesn't have all the jargon. Just give you a good base knowledge to go forth with.
So you talk about the chaotic money world. Specifically, what has happened this year with the COVID and the pandemic that has affected the money world in ways that really affect people's personal finances?
Sure. What has not happened? I think all of us, 2020 is something we want to get behind us because we've had massive moves in the market, really unprecedented with regard to the velocity that we've seen. It's been scary, certainly March 23rd, I can remember well, I was scared. I think everybody was very concerned about what was going on. And then from going, crashing down the way it did and then to accelerate and come back up the way it has, granted that's not a broad recovery by any stretch, but it did come back. And now, we have a presidential election. We have, a lot of new Fed policies that are very interesting. We just have so much stuff going on that I think 2020 is one of those years you can look at and just say, wow, what didn't happen this year?
So how do you guide people who are scared and uncertain to keep on their financial plan amidst all these uncertainties?
Well, I think it comes down to planning. We've had real good luck keeping our clients calm, not because of anything we've done in the moment, but because they all actually have a financial plan. They know what it's going to take to get to where they need to be. And they know that, what happens in 1 year, for instance, 2020, for the most part, is just a blip. Even when it's as extreme as we've seen, it's just a blip. And when they really understand this and acknowledge it, it's still not fun. But they're able to make better decisions. Specifically
relating to budgeting, when your income is more uncertain, you may either be laid off or have fewer hours, or your sales are down if you're a small business. How can you budget in such an uncertain environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think certainly the pandemic has hit different people in different ways. Some people believe it or not, are having the best years they've ever had, and others are out of jobs. And of course, I've talked to people all the way across that gamut. And I've been amazed at the resilience of a lot of the people that I've talked to whose income is down or, maybe temporarily don't have a job. And I think their resilience can be dialed into just one thing, that they have sufficient cash reserves, to make it through short-term situations, like 3 to 6 months. I think that cash is absolutely critical when things just come out of left field and just like this year did, and slap you right across the face. You have to have cash. Has to be ready, and it has to be something that it's something that you're going to rely on in that situation.
Financial planners typically say you should have 3 to 6 months in cash reserves ready, but a lot of people just don't have extra savings. They're just living paycheck to paycheck, and they can't put that amount of money aside. What do people do in that circumstance?
I think it's tough. I think that, I don't know. I really don't know. I think that every experience I've ever been where things got rough for Shelly and I, cash was what kind of made it through for us. And when we didn't have cash, I know that it was especially painful. So if you don't have that cash now, you're probably going to have to rely on some type of credit. It's going to take a while to dig out of that. But as Americans, I think one thing I have noticed is regardless of where people have been that I've talked to, they seem to be very, you need to stay positive and hopeful. And I've seen a lot of that. And I think that, looking at the situation is super important. A lot of times what people will do, I've noticed as a financial planner, is they'll refuse to look at the situation. They'll refuse to objectively just see, okay, where am I and where am I wanting to go? What's the situation right now? Kind of bury their heads, so to speak. And, that's a huge mistake because, every situation is different, but every situation, I believe, does have an answer. But in order to get that answer, you have to talk about it. You have to realize it. You have to plan.
People don't want to look at bad news. They don't want to think about death. They don't want to think about losing their jobs. They just don't want to deal with bad news in many cases. So you're the bearer of bad news, I guess. You have these meetings and you say, well, you've got to plan for your death. You've got to plan for you losing your job. I guess that's not an easy position for you to be in.
Yeah, Jordan, that's a good point. I never had really thought of it that way, but we do talk a lot in doom and gloom around here. And I think that the way to do it effectively, we use humor, where we can. We try to keep things light and fun. Try not to scare people. I hate it when people in my industry, try to scare people into doing something. We just try to talk about it real objectively. And I think that what happens is, and you can see it, when you start talking through the situation for the first time, a client, for instance, you can just kind of see this weight just come off of their shoulders because, that's when you start being able to deal with it. And I love that. I love that experience of being able to talk through something hard. Granted, I will say sometimes it is very, very difficult.
What are some ways to prepare your finances for the unexpected? Because we've had a lot of unexpected things this year. What are some ways to plan so you don't get upset financially by the unexpected?
Sure. Well, we've talked about it already. Cash is king. Making sure that you have adequate cash on hand. And along that same line, just kind of looking at your own personal balance sheet and making sure that you don't have too much debt as well. That would be the first thing. Secondly, I think you need to understand insurance. I hate talking about insurance. It's boring. There's a whole chapter in the book on it. It honestly is the most boring thing to write ever, but it is so necessary that you understand insurance and you use it where it needs to be. Because some of the things that come out of left field that can really hurt you are, healthcare situations, death, disability, long-term care. Those are all things that you can use insurance effectively for, and you need to know how to do that. Cash, trying to make sure that you have adequate insurance, make sure that you have proper estate planning, and that you have thought through what it is that needs to happen at your death or at your disability, for instance, or whatever it may be. And then business owners have a whole other gamut of things that they need to be dealing with from a buy-sell standpoint and what needs to happen with the business and so forth. So there's a lot of planning that can happen ahead of time before these things hit you that can make it a lot easier to get through them.
Do you think most people are underinsured or overinsured? And specifically, which kind? Life insurance, health insurance? Where are they most overinsured and underinsured?
Yeah, all I can really, I don't know in general, but I can tell you from the people that I talk to, very, very few people have disability income insurance. And I think it's very important. So I think that's somewhere where people are underinsured. Life insurance, It depends. I think that I think you have to go through a really good analysis to really understand how much life insurance you need. And I would say that for the most part, I think people probably underinsured there. And then long-term care is a real tough deal. Long-term care insurance is very expensive, and that's something that you just have to objectively look at, and it just kind of depends. Some people need it, and some people don't.
It's gone up in cost dramatically as the projections that they made were completely wrong. Do you think it makes sense to do long-term care insurance even at the much higher premiums today?
I think it can. The way we make that decision is through a plan. We'll try to basically fail a plan with different things that we'll throw in there, like additional healthcare costs or 2 years of long-term care at the end of life. And then we'll just try to see, whether the plan can handle it or not. And if it can't, then we suggest to the client to look into long-term care. It depends on their age, depends on their health. But in many cases, it does make sense.
And life insurance, are you big a fan of term or cash value or some combination thereof?
Again, it depends. I personally own permanent life insurance. It's a variable policy. I love it. But in order to own a permanent life insurance policy, you have to treat it as an ongoing obligation to keep track of and to take care of. And most people that buy permanent life insurance, they buy it and forget it, and it can turn into a real problem. Term is easy, it's inexpensive. If you're underinsured, just don't even think about it. Just go buy some term insurance, and so in many cases that makes the most sense.
What is the problem with whole life or permanent insurance? It becomes too costly, is that what you're saying?
I think the biggest problem is it's so complicated and people don't understand it. And they have a hard time finding somebody that can help them understand what they have. Over and over, people come in with those policies, and their agent has gotten out of the business a long time ago, and they're just really looking for somebody to tell them whether what they have makes sense or not. And so obviously, there's a huge need for that.
Very good. We're going to take a break. This is Jordan Goodman of the Money Answer Show. My guest this hour is Rob Schulz. He's the founder and president of Schulz Wealth. He's one of the top financial planners in the country. His book is called Thoughts on Things Financial, Your Guide to a Chaotic Money World. And you can find out more about him and his books at schulzwealth.com.
9-0. Now back to Jordan.
Welcome back to the Money Answer Show. This is Jordan Goodman, your host. My guest this hour is Rob Schulz. He's the founder and president of Schulz Wealth and author of a new book called Thoughts on Things Financial, Your Guide to a Chaotic Money World. You can find out more at his website, schulzwealth.com. Welcome back to the show, Rob.
Thanks, Jordan.
Tell people what they can find at schulzwealth.com.
Sure. On the website, of course, you can go on and you can purchase the book if you'd like. And then there's also a section that's of blog posts. And that's where a lot of the information for the book came from, is just years and years of just, talking and writing about this stuff. So you can usually go in there and kind of search on a different topic and just kind of find my thoughts on things that have to do with financial planning.
Now, you talk about teaching kids about children. What are some of the do's and don'ts of teaching your kids to have a wealth of financial knowledge? A lot of parents don't feel very comfortable talking about money to anybody, never mind their kids. How can they get over that?
Yeah, Jordan, that's a huge issue. As a matter of fact, I was having lunch with a fairly new client just this last week, and it came up, just kids, and his kids are adults, young adults, and one of the problems with his financial plan is that he is continuing to support them and to provide them with money, and they're just not, as you could say, launching as quickly as he would have hoped. And what was interesting is his answer to that was to do a bunch of estate work, to create a will and make sure that, oh my gosh, if something happens to the two of us, that there's going to be a trustee in place that, takes care of everything because, my kids just aren't there. And so often I hear that as the answer, when the real answer is we really should be training our kids how to use money. And we shouldn't be starting when they're 25. We should be starting probably by the time they're 13 or 14, and definitely 16 when they start to get a car. When they start driving, that's a great opportunity to start teaching them about money. So I always recommend that when you get to that point, have your kid make a budget. And that's the other way that people screw it up, is they'll tell the kid, all right, here's $200 a month, go figure it out. Ask them how much they think they need, and you will be shocked that they have absolutely no clue what anything costs, and they'll come back with a ridiculously low number. And then you have a conversation with them about it, and then you tell them what they're supposed to be using that money for, and then they go forth. But then, if your spouse is still giving them money for the same things, or if you just don't hold the line, then they don't learn those important rules of money that, when you go below it on the, going out to eat and that sort of thing at the beginning of the month, you're not going to have any money at the end of the month. And that's something that's best that they learn while they're still under your roof, and not later on when it's much more difficult.
So you're saying if you give them $200 a month or something, and midway through the month they've run out of money, don't give them any more, is what you're saying?
Yeah, make them kind of feel the results of the decisions they made. Lord knows we all get to feel that, don't we?
Right.
And let them feel it now when it doesn't count for as much, because later, it gets a little tougher.
Yeah. Let's talk about the stock market a little bit. We've had a tremendous economic downturn because of the coronavirus, and it seems like the virus is getting worse right now. What is the case for investing in stocks when the economy seems to be getting weaker all the time?
Yeah, sure. The case for stocks always comes up, when the market, tanks like it's been doing here recently or earlier this year. I'll have to bring up another example. And I really think that investing properly is so counterintuitive, because I have a client who invests a pretty good amount every single month, and we pull that money and we get it to work. But every once in a while, they don't want us to pull that money, and it usually corresponds with a huge drop in the market, or something like what, for instance, we had last week. Over the long term, what happens there is that there's not enough money for us to invest for that client when the price is actually lower. So, just reacting in a way that we just makes sense to us is like, oh, I don't know what's going on, so I need to not invest right now. Sometimes over a long period of time can be to our detriment.
So you're really a dollar cost averaging fan. Just keep investing no matter what the prices are.
Yeah, and of course, it's more complicated than that when you're doing it professionally like we do. But, having that cash available to be able to take advantage of opportunities really helps us make sure that the portfolios are going to perform better than they would if we don't have that money at that crucial time. But then all of a sudden, that money's coming in like crazy when the market's hot. That just makes it harder. Dollar cost averaging works. Trying not to guess what the market is going to do next works. We're so afraid of risk. We're all very risk averse. And so we're trying to figure out what's going to happen next. Well, we really don't know what's going to happen next. And honestly, that unknown factor is how we actually make market return in the stock market. If there really were no unknowns about what was going to happen, then we wouldn't have market return. Yeah,
you're getting paid for that uncertainty to some extent.
Absolutely.
You say often people, particularly retirement investing for retirement, that we're our own worst enemy. What do you mean by that?
Oh yeah, I wrote a chapter in the book called "The Hardest Easy," and I basically talked through a circus of a duck hunt I had with my son, where we just kept screwing everything up. And I think that sometimes investing is the same way, just like that example I just gave you, where it's so counterintuitive, what we should be doing, and then we go do the wrong things. And we just seem to do this to ourselves over and over again as we're trying to save for our retirement. And
what are some examples of that, of doing the wrong things over and over?
Sure. Well, not having enough cash, and then having to pull money out of a 401k and pay all the penalties and so forth on it. That's just shooting yourself in the foot. Not having a plan at all, and having no idea how much you're supposed to be contributing. You're just contributing into the plan at whatever level you get your match at, and you've never really tried to figure out how much that really should be. People, when they leave their jobs, I think a lot of the mistakes have to do with that 401k balance. They leave their jobs and they either leave that over at that previous company and never look at it again, and they have no idea how it's invested or what it's doing, or they roll it out into cash to use as they search for a new job, for instance, or something like that, because again, they don't have enough cash to deal with that situation.
You talk about debt, saying becoming debt-free is not a goal in and of itself, but you find a lot of people get 10 years from retirement with no debt and also no savings, and that's not a good place to be. Is it better to have a little bit more debt and more savings? How do you do the balance between debt and savings as you approach retirement?
Yeah, Jordan, you said balance, and a lot of what I talk about has to do with balance, and not doing one thing or the other, but doing both, or even three things at once. And again, a little counterintuitive, because we know that if we want to accomplish a goal, we focus on it, and we just focus on that one thing and solve that problem. But the problem is with financial planning is there's this time value of money component that you have to be able to work. You have to be saving at the same time as you're doing all these other things. So you're saving cash, you're investing for retirement, you're paying down debt. You have to do it all at once. And if you just focus on one of those things, then the others will become a huge problem for you at some point.
The problem with savings is you earn nothing on it today, and the outlook is you're going to earn zero for as far as the eye can see. So what can motivate people to put money aside on which they're going to earn nothing?
Yeah, it is so hard right now to do that. But the interesting thing is most of the people I talk to right now probably have too much cash on hand because they're also concerned about where the market is. And they're very anxious about it. I don't know. I think that you just have to resign to the fact that there's going to be a certain amount of money that's going to be needed for something that you're not going to be able to make any money on, and probably just live with it. The rest of it certainly should be invested. And you are in a dangerous place if you have a large amount of cash that you're relying on for long term and you don't have it properly invested.
Indeed. All right, we're going to take another break. This is Jordan Goodman of the Money Answer Show. My guest this hour is Rob Schulz. He's the founder and president of Schulz Wealth, based in Mansfield, Texas. You can find out more about him at his website, schulzwealth.com. And his new book is called Thoughts on Things Financial, Your Guide to a Chaotic Money World. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to the Money Answer Show. This is Jordan Goodman, your host. My guest this hour is Rob Schulz. He's the founder and president of Schulz Wealth, based in Mansfield, Texas. His website is schulzwealth.com, and you can find out more about his book, Thoughts on Things Financial, Your Guide to a Chaotic Money World. Welcome back to the show, Rob.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thinking of a chaotic world, we have an election tomorrow, actually.
Yes, we do.
What difference will it make to people's money and portfolios and tax strategy? Let's go one direction or the other. Let's say that Trump is reelected. What would make a difference from that compared to if Biden's elected?
Well, I think first of all, just the election itself just causes a lot of uneasiness with investors, whether it should or not, it just does. And we go back and we look at and try to figure out, whether, like for instance, a Democrat or Republican is good for the stock market, and there's no clear answer that one or the other is good for the stock market. What is interesting is that you do see a correlation between better than average returns in the year after an election than you do otherwise. So, if you wanted to bet on it, maybe that's a good way to go. Although I wouldn't, I would think that you just kind of need to hold the course. But
could this year be different since we have this virus that's not calming down? It's getting stronger and more widespread all the time. How would that impact the outlook for 2021 if the virus continues at current levels or even goes higher?
Oh, sure. No, definitely there needs to be, something needs to happen. And the market has made it really clear that they want to see something happen, with regard to providing some relief, for people again. And either way, whether either candidate wins, I would say that something does need to happen, and probably will either way. It's just that right now, with the election being when it is, they weren't able to come up with any kind of right answer with that regard.
What do you think would be the right kind of stimulus for them to pass?
Well, I'm not a political expert, but it needs to be something that certainly makes the market more comfortable with the economy as a whole, and something similar to what was provided initially could be something in the right direction. I was impressed with the response, especially from the Fed when all this came about. They were very, very fast about it. And I think that is what helped us accelerate back out of those lows as fast as we did. And, it's probably some of what we've seen here recently in the last week or two has to do with, the market Wall Street seeing that, here we are again back in Washington where things happen a little bit too slow. And so I would like to see the pace kind of pick up with regard to, providing whatever it may be, something that helps Americans and helps make sure that we don't lose any more great corporations either.
So let's talk about the Fed for a little bit. So the Fed has brought interest rates down to zero. Overseas, particularly in Europe, you literally have negative interest rates. You've had that for almost 3 years now. Is this a sign? Normally you think low interest rates would be great for the economy, or is this a sign of deflation that should worry people that interest rates are so low and in fact negative?
Yeah, interest rates being at zero it just seems crazy. And then you look at negative interest rates overseas, and that's even crazier. It hurts your brain to try to think through that. So at zero, I'm not as concerned about deflation as, believe it or not, I'm a little bit concerned about inflation, because at the same time that the Fed has said that they're going to keep these rates low, they've also kind of taken their hands off with regard to inflation and said, we'll kind of let it run. We're looking at 2% not as a cap, but more as kind of an average. And so that's what scares me a little bit as a money manager, because we've talked about the stock market, but another big part of investing is the bond market. And we talked about a little bit because we talked about, cash, but, kind of in between stocks and cash are bonds or CDs and things like that. And, for most people, you've heard of the 60-40 portfolio, the average portfolio. Well, 40% of their portfolio is in bonds. And, at 0% return, or near 0% return, and inflation rising over time, that means those bonds are not, that bond part of your portfolio is doing absolutely nothing for you. And so I think that what you're seeing is, the average portfolio that an investment advisor tries to use with their clients is starting to look kind of broken. And so we're all trying to scramble around and figure out what to do.
So what would you do with that 40% of the portfolio that would normally be in bonds, whether treasuries, corporates, or municipals?
Well, the first thing is, like I've said over and over and over again today, is, cash. You're just going to have to live with the fact that you're going to need some cash that's not going to make any money at all. And the whole purpose of that cash is to protect your portfolio so that you don't have to go and liquidate your stock positions when they potentially would be down. And then in between, a lot of people are using different things. We're using protection. We're actually using buffered ETFs, which is a pretty complex strategy. But what it does is it allows you potentially to have some market return up to a cap. But then on the downside, you have a buffer. So you have some protection on the downside, say 9% down, 15% down, something like that. And then we kind of are trying to use that as a middle ground, as kind of a safety valve in between the stocks and the cash.
What are some of the names of some of these buffered ETFs if people want to look into that? Maybe their stock symbols.
Yeah, the one we use is through Innovator, and the symbols, they come out every month, so the symbols change a lot. But the main buffer is the just usually B as in Bravo, followed by the month, like BSEP for the September issue of that buffer.
And they last for a year or a month? How long do these things last?
The ones we use last for a year, and yeah, they're usually a year long. You can also use structured notes in the same way. Those are usually issued by the investment banks, and they're a little bit longer. They'll go out sometimes 3 years. This
is like an S&P 500 index that gives you some upside, but it gives you some downside protection. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's gonna be options based. So it'll have one option in there that's gonna mimic the S&P 500 or whatever index you want, and then it's gonna have another option in there that's gonna create the cap, basically sell off above a certain return level to then buy the protection on the downside. And then it's wrapped in an ETF or exchange traded fund. And so then you get daily valuation and liquidity.
What do you think of index annuities and index universal life insurance that have some downside protection, but you participate on the upside?
Yeah, I think a lot of advisors are going to that. We prefer going direct and kind of getting the insurance company out of the middle, because there can be a lot of costs associated with that. Basically, what we're using in this ETF is what the insurance companies use to protect them when they provide those types of products.
So what do you think is the long-term trend in tax rates? In general, last few years, taxes have been coming down. We've got the lowest corporate rate we've had in a long time. Individual rates are relatively low. The capital gains is tapped at 20%. Biden is talking about eliminating the differential between capital gains rates and regular income rates. What do you think is the outlook for tax rates going forward?
Sure. I think taxes are going up. I think that they kind of need to. We need to probably be paying a little bit more in tax at certain levels, at least, of the economy or of individuals. So I would expect it to go up, plain and simple. I don't think it really matters who gets elected. I think that we're going to see over the long term, we're going to see taxes come up, and that needs to be taken into account when you're putting together your financial plan.
So what are some specific things you should do? Assuming tax rates are going up, what are some things you should do now to prepare for that?
Sure. One thing you need to be asking is, do I really want to defer taxation into the future or not? And we help people figure that out when we do a plan with them. Sometimes we'll run a plan, and even at today's tax rates, they've been so good at saving that they're going to have a higher tax rate in retirement than they have, currently living, or working rather. And that's something that you can protect or change by using, for instance, Roth conversions, or just not deferring all of your investments, but rather just having a plain old investment account that has taxation to it kind of as you go, so to speak.
What would be the impact on the market if there was no more capital gains differential, if you paid regular income rates on all capital gains?
I don't know. That's a good question. All I could really think of from that standpoint is, whatever the differential is between, for instance, my average client's, income tax rate and the capital gains tax rate. They more often than not, they'd end up paying a little bit more tax, but not a whole lot more. So it's hard to say. We had some other interesting things, like, for instance, when they changed up the standard deduction, that we thought that nobody was going to donate to charity anymore, for instance, or when they capped the property tax levels that you could deduct, we thought nobody was going to ever buy a house again. Sometimes I think that we think that people's behavior is more tax motivated than it really is. So it'd be interesting to see. But I do expect that whatever tax changes we see, they're not going to hit us right square in the face with it. I think it's going to be on the periphery.
And it'd be phased in over time, you're saying?
What's that?
It would be phased in over time. It wouldn't be an immediate hit.
Well, phased over time, but then also kind of hitting you in different areas where you maybe don't see it coming. Like, for instance, Medicare, high earners, people that have a high income or tax level in retirement, well, they pay a lot more for Medicare, for instance. That's a tax in my mind.
Yeah, very good. All right, we're going to take another break. This is Jordan Goodman of the Money Answer Show. My guest this hour is Rob Schulz, founder and president of Schulz Wealth, based in Mansfield, Texas. His book is called Thoughts on Things Financial, Your Guide to a Chaotic Money World, and his website, schulzwealth.com. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to the Money Answer Show. This is Jordan Goodman, your host. My guest this hour is Rob Schulz. He's the president and chief executive officer of Schulz Wealth, based in Mansfield, Texas. His book is called Thoughts on Things Financial, Your Guide to a Chaotic Money World. His website, schulzwealth.com. Welcome back to the show, Rob.
Thanks, Jordan.
So let's do a little estate planning here. You say it's important to have a letter to heirs, which people tend not to talk about. Is this kind of where you sit down reading the will and the lawyer says who gets what? I mean, tell us what the letter to heirs is all about.
Sure, you bet. This is a really popular topic when we start talking about estate planning with our clients, and I think it's something that doesn't get talked about enough. People misunderstand sometimes what a will really is and what it does. And generally, a will is going to help you pass, let's call it the big stuff, okay? Like your house, your assets, things like that. It's not going to get down into specifics about, grandmother's rocking chair or who gets what jewelry and things like that. And so a lot of times that gets missed. And so what I recommend to clients that they do is, after they've gone through all their estate planning, I recommend that they write a letter to their heirs. And it's a really hard letter to write. Every time I do it, I get a little emotional because it's, you're thinking about it as if you're dead. It's kind of hard to do. But in this letter, you're just trying to provide some guidance and some help. Some of the things that you can do is, like, just talk specifically about, what it is that they need to do, like to wrap up your business, and who can be trusted and who they should look to for help. Also, about the service, about pallbearers, who should be notified. A lot of times there's a lot of stress when somebody dies, trying to find old friends that maybe, really need to know, but you just have a hard time knowing where they are. So this helps them from that standpoint as well. The other thing is an obituary. Another very stressful thing for your heirs to write after you've passed, and they don't know all the stuff off the top of their head like you do that probably needs to be in there, so you can provide them with some guidance. There's just stuff like that never gets dealt with within the true official estate documents that you can just write out and sign. It's not legal or anything. It's just guidance and help. And a letter like that can just help tremendously when your family's trying to deal with these things.
Should you put some surprises in there, both positive and negative? This person gets more, and this cousin I always hated, and you get nothing, and things like that. Is that part of what you should be doing?
I wouldn't think so. I would think that you want to keep things. I don't think that'd be a very good idea. Surprises are never a good thing when it comes to estate planning, in my opinion. You never just want to throw something on people. If you're planning and doing it right, remember you're educating your kids how to save and invest, and you're talking with people about this stuff. Communication is key while you're living, so that when you die and all this stuff happens, there's no big surprise. It's just going along as the planned it out.
Yeah. As far as picking a financial advisor, one of your chapters is called Who's Who in the Zoo. So there's a lot of different people doing financial advice. There are people who get commissions. There are people who get management fees. How did you pick the financial advisor? And say you don't have a huge amount of money, and you can't really afford a big asset management fee. How could people get good financial advice today? A lot of younger people just go to robo-advisors, and they just do it all online with artificial intelligence. How should people pick good financial advisors today?
Yeah, you bet. It's so confusing. That's why I wrote the chapter, is because everybody just gets very confused about, who's who in the zoo, so to speak. So in the chapter, I just try to identify, help you understand, the different roles that different people have. And that is where it really comes down. Obviously, if you have a good amount of assets and so forth, and I think everybody's gotten to the point where they realize they need to actually pay somebody for advice, meaning that you've got a fiduciary advisor who's not working off commission, that they pay either a percentage of assets to manage the money, or they're paying a financial planning fee. What people may not realize is that that has come down and down market to be more and more affordable to more people through different things like XY planning, and just financial planners that have decided that that's the way they want to work. And you'd be surprised, that you may be able to find that fiduciary level advice at a much lower level than maybe you thought. Also, Jordan, you brought up, a great point, the new technology, the betterments and so forth of the world.
Robo-advice, right.
Yeah, robo-advice. The technology is amazing. Like, for instance, we clear through TD Ameritrade for most of our accounts, but we have a relationship with Betterment, and we love it because, we can actually bring and help a client at a much lower level than we used to be, and that's what we want to do. And put them within that betterment realm. They're in our investments, for instance. We can actually provide the portfolio for them, but more importantly, we can help them get through it. Because what we found is, most people just are so confused by all the jargon, and just trying to make a decision without help is so difficult. So we can provide them with some guidance and get them into the right portfolio with, for instance, a betterment, which I think is a great option and definitely worthwhile.
One thing you think is not very well appreciated is the time value of money. So maybe just talk a little bit about the time value of money and how money can compound both for you if it's compounding, or against you if you're paying interest on a credit card or some kind of debt.
Oh, for sure. And as we get older, we start to realize these things, right? You get in, I'm in my 50s, if I started now, there's absolutely no way I can have, really what I could have if I started early. So it's super important that you get started, and that's the hardest part. That's what I always tell people, you've got to start. And you start low, and then what happens with time value of money is it tricks you in the first part, because nothing really happens. You've got these small amounts of money going in, and, it just still always, it feels like a small amount of money, even like a few years later. And you get tricked into thinking that it's not important at that level, but it is, because it had to start and it had to go through those beginning stages. And then it starts to double on itself and really grow at a faster clip the further down the road you get. But if a few years down, you don't recognize how important it is and you cash it out to do this or that or whatever, then you're starting at zero again. And I just see that over and over. And I just really encourage people to understand that they have to start and they have to keep at it in order for it to work.
Since we have such low interest rates, people who have accumulated some good amount of money through time value of money, where can they invest today purely for income with keeping their principal relatively stable, since CDs and money market funds are pretty much zero and long bonds are 1% or less? What are some alternative investments for people to produce income to live on?
Income's tough. In my world, income is really, really tough. It's something that frankly has gone away with interest rates going so low. Some people will chase some dividend stocks, but that's not the same thing. It's still a stock that moves around. And I think the first thing you need to do is ask why. Why are you looking for income? And a lot of times people are looking for income because they're in retirement and they're going to draw down on their portfolio. But modern advisors don't necessarily provide the income in the same way that they used to. We used to do it by laddering out some bonds and then just having that steady income drop in. But that was back when bond rates, were much higher. Now, what we do is we just manage the portfolio towards that income that the client receives, but it's really not income. It's a combination of different types of return that the market is providing.
Yeah, very good. Well, we've got a lot of good ideas this hour. My guest has been Rob Schulz. His website, again, is schulzwealth.com. And you can find a lot of this and much more at his book called Thoughts on Things Financial, Your Guide to a Chaotic Money World. I think we've given people a lot of very helpful advice. So thanks so much for being a great guest on the Money Answer Show, Rob.
Thanks, Jordan. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again. We'll be back next week with another edition of the Money Answer Show. Goodbye for now.
Thank you for joining Jordan Goodman and the Money Answer Show. If you have a question for Jordan, please visit his website at www.